Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us into the mind of David Corona and his project, Usted, esta, Aquí.
Which, for everyone out there, means you are here.
It's photography, but also,
Seriously, we're talking proposals, sketches, even Corona's notes while he was brainstorming.
like we're piecing the puzzle together with him.
What got me right off the bat was how Corona takes Dante Inferno classic stuff and blends it with cutting-edge digital art.
He's not just like illustrating the poem, right?
Yeah, not even close. He's using it, building on those big questions the poem asks. Sin, virtue, what does it even mean to be human, but in this whole digital space?
It's almost like he's saying those circles of hell, they're not ancient history, they're us, the choices we make.
Exactly. He calls it moral topography. Dante used actual landscapes, mountains and valleys, to show good and bad.
Right, like the higher up you go, the more virtuous.
Yeah. Corona takes that and makes it digital. These landscapes you can get immersed in, but they're shaped by us, not by, mountains and rivers.
Okay, so before we go full-on digital Dante, who is David Corona, what's he all about artistically?
Looking at his stuff, he's really into constructed landscapes. Environments deliberately made by humans,
Okay,
but
so
he uses those landscapes to hold up a mirror to us,
yeah,
our values, the impact we have, good and bad.
kind of bleak, but powerful.
Totally. Uses those disported buildings, all gray and overwhelming, to make you feel how isolating cities can be. Critique on how we design them.
So not just a pretty picture, more like a picture meant to start a conversation.
100%.
And essentially that means like landscapes that humans have designed to make you feel a certain way.
Oh, right, like those Zen gardens, right, where every rock, every wake line in the sand, it all means something.
Exactly. But
Yep.
this is way more high tech, obviously. So like imagine those super intense video game environments, right? But instead of just being pretty backdrops, they're actually making a statement about sin and morality and all that heavy stuff.
So he's using the landscape, the actual world you're in, to kind of mess with your head, get you thinking.
Exactly. Which honestly is kind of brilliant when you think about it. I mean,
Wow.
we all know how powerful a sense of place can be, right? So why not use that power to explore some of these big timeless questions?
It's like he's taken that old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and turned it into a landscape's worth 1,000 existential crises.
Right.
I kind of love it, but it makes you wonder, though, this constructed landscape idea, it's not exactly new, right? We were just talking about Zen gardens. So what makes this project different? What makes it stand out?
Well, aside from the whole Dante's Inferno thing, I mean, that's a pretty big differentiator. But I think it's also about how he's using technology to create a truly immersive experience.
Okay, that makes sense. Because we've been playing with constructed landscapes for centuries, but we've never had tools like VR and AR before. Suddenly, we can step into those landscapes, interact with them in a way that was never possible before.
Yeah, and I think that's a key part of what makes this project so exciting, and maybe even a little bit unsettling. Because it's not just about looking at a picture or walking through a garden. It's about feeling like you're really there in the middle of this constructed reality.
And in this case, that reality happens to be Dante's vision of hell.
Exactly. And trust me, this isn't your grandma's inferno either. Corona's really diving deep into the psychology of it all, exploring what these different circles of hell say about us as humans, about our fears, our desires, our capacity for both good and evil.
So it's like a funhouse mirror, but for your soul.
Something like that.
I'm in. But why do you think someone in the 21st century would want to do this? Like, why Dante? Why hell? Why now?
That's a great question. And honestly, I think there are a lot of answers. I mean, on one level, it's just a fascinating thought experiment, right? Like, what would it actually be like to experience Dante's vision firsthand? But on a deeper level, I think it speaks to something we're all grappling with these days.
Which is?
This feeling of being overwhelmed by technology, by information overload, by this constant sense of uncertainty about the future.
Oh, 100%. Like the world's moving so fast and we're
Nay.
all just trying to keep up.
Exactly. And in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and unpredictable, maybe there's something comforting, even if it's also terrifying, about revisiting a story that's been with us for centuries. A story that reminds us that we're not the first ones to grapple with these big existential questions.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, even if the answers are uncomfortable, there's still some comfort in knowing that we're not alone in asking the questions.
You know, speaking of uncomfortable, there's this one detail from the project that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
So Corona, he talks about this circle of hell, right? And in this circle, the landscape is constantly in flux. Like imagine a desert wasteland, but the ground is never solid It's always shifting, moving beneath you. You could never, like, build a house there,
Yeah.
because the foundation would just crumble away.
Yikes. That's giving me anxiety just thinking about it.
Right. And it makes me think about how we live now, always bombarded with information, everything changing so fast. You never really feel grounded.
It's like that feeling of trying to stand on a surfboard for the first time.
Yes, exactly. You're never fully balanced. It's that constant sense of precarity.
And he's using the landscape itself to represent that.
So brilliant, right?
Totally. It's like he's saying, hey, the ground beneath our feet might seem solid, but what happens when it starts to shift?
And that's what I think is so cool about this project. It's not just a visual spectacle. It's like this weird, twisted mirror reflecting our own anxieties back at us.
Yeah, and let's not forget, this is all rooted in Dante, right? Like, this isn't just Corona coming up with random hellscapes. He's drawing on centuries of tradition, centuries of thinking about sin and punishment and the afterlife.
Totally. And that's why I think it's so effective.
Hmm.
Because it taps into something primal, something deeply ingrained in our collective consciousness. We've all grown up with these stories, these images.
Even if we haven't read Dante, we know the basics. We know about the 9 circles of hell, the punishments fitting the crimes, all that.
Exactly. So when Corona puts us in that world, even if it's a virtual world, it triggers something deep down and makes us confront these big questions, whether we want to or not.
Makes you think about that quote from Corana's bio where he's talking about creation. He says, hold on, I've got it right here. Before me, there were no created things but eternal things.
Oh, wow, that's good.
Right. And he goes on to talk about how even in creating a hellscape, the artist is reflecting something of themselves, something of their own internal world.
So, like, he's saying that even in the darkest creations, there's a glimmer of the creator.
Exactly. And that even our attempts to grapple with evil, to understand it, to represent it, say something about us, it's like, who's really being judged here? The damned souls or the ones who created the system?
Okay, so,
It's like anyone can create a beautiful world in VR, but Corona wants you to feel something when you're there. He wants you to confront something uncomfortable, something about yourself, about humanity.
which makes me think about the title, Usted, Aquí. You are here. It's like he's not just putting you in Dante's world, he's forcing you to acknowledge your own place in it.
And to confront the consequences of your actions or even your inactions within that world.
It's heavy stuff. But there's also this weird sense of, I don't know, hope, optimism.
Hmm.
It's hard to explain.
No, I get it. It's like even in the darkest corners, there's still this spark of creativity, this desire to make sense of the world, even the parts that scare us.
Yes, exactly. And Corona actually talks about that, like finding inspiration in unexpected places.
Oh, right. Like he even mentions a dirty wall at one point, if I remember correctly.
It's like he's saying, you don't need fancy technology or some grand vision to make art. You just need to be open to seeing the world, even the messy parts, with fresh eyes.
And that's what connects him to Dante, right? This idea that inspiration can come from anywhere, even the darkest depths of our imagination. I mean, Dante looked at the world around him, all the political turmoil, the violence, the corruption, and he turned it into this epic poem that's still relevant centuries later.
Right. It's like this reminder that art has this power to transform even the ugliest stuff into something beautiful, something meaningful.
And more than that, it makes us think. It forces us to confront these big questions that we might otherwise try to avoid.
Totally. It's like we can try to ignore the darkness, pretend it's not there,
Hmm.
but art, whether it's Dante's Inferno or Corona's virtual hellscapes, it shines a light on those dark corners and forces us to confront them head on.
And maybe, just maybe, by confronting those fears, by looking them in the eye, we can start to find a way through them.
Ugh, that's so good. I'm writing that down.
Wow.
But it makes you wonder, what would Dante think of all this? Like, if we could show him this project, this digital inferno, these augmented reality punishments.
Oh man, that's a great question. I think he'd be blown away by the technology for sure. But at its core, I think he'd recognize what Corona is doing. He'd see that same desire to grapple with the big questions, to use art as a way to understand the human condition, even the parts that make us uncomfortable.
Yeah, and maybe even find some beauty in those uncomfortable places.
Exactly. Because that's what art does, right? It takes the chaos of the world and tries to make sense of it. It gives us a new perspective, a new way of seeing things. And sometimes that new perspective can be both terrifying and exhilarating at the same time.
Well said. I think that's a perfect place to wrap up this deep dive. We explored some seriously mind-bending stuff today, but ultimately, I think it all comes back to this idea that art has this incredible power to make us think, to make us feel, and maybe even to help us find a little bit of light in the darkest of places.